Have you ever watched someone so sure of their own greatness that they couldn't see the quiet genius standing right beside them? In the heart of Vienna, the Global Linguistics Summit unfolded in a grand dinner hall, its high ceilings draped with glittering chandeliers that cast a warm glow over rows of elegantly set tables. Scholars, reporters, and academic leaders filled the room, their voices a low hum of excitement. At the center of it all sat Dr. Elias Thorne, a 52-year-old linguist whose name carried weight in every major university from Tokyo to Oxford. With sharp gray eyes and a perfectly tailored suit, he commanded attention without effort. His books on ancient languages lined shelves worldwide, and his ability to speak 28 languages fluently made him a legend. Tonight, he was the star of the summit, seated at the head table, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. Thorne leaned back in his chair, a glass of red wine in hand, his voice cutting through the chatter. "This," he said, gesturing to a massive screen behind him, "is the puzzle that will cement my legacy." The screen lit up with an image of strange symbols, a mix of sharp angles and flowing curves, discovered recently in the rugged mountains of Papua New Guinea. The writing was unlike anything in known linguistics, partly resembling Pacific scripts, but laced with unfamiliar signs that had baffled experts for months. "No one's cracked it," Thorne continued, his tone brimming with confidence. "But I will. Only a master like me can unravel this mystery." The crowd murmured, impressed. Reporters scribbled notes, and professors leaned forward, eager to see the great Dr. Thorne at work. The symbols seemed to pulse with secrets, their jagged lines and soft loops defying easy interpretation. Thorne had been studying them for weeks, his team burning through late nights in his university office. Tonight's evening talk was his stage to prove his brilliance. He stood, pacing before the screen, a wireless tablet in hand. "Let's start with this," he said, circling a cluster of symbols with a digital pen. "This could be a trade log, maybe for goods like shells or tools." He tapped the screen, projecting his notes for all to see. Or perhaps it's a ritual map, pointing to sacred caves in the mountains. His guesses sounded plausible, but as he cross-referenced them with known Pacific languages, the connections fell apart. The symbols refused to align. Thorne's confident smile tightened, though he kept his voice steady. "It's a complex system," he said, scribbling another theory. "Maybe a calendar for planting seasons." But the more he tried, the less sense it made. His tablet filled with crossed-out ideas, and a faint sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. The crowd shifted in their seats, sensing his struggle. He flipped through digital archives, comparing the symbols to others from the region, but nothing matched. "This is trickier than I expected," he admitted, his tone sharper now. "But I'll have it solved by morning." A few guests exchanged glances, their earlier awe tinged with doubt. Across the hall, Bella Santos moved quietly among the tables, her presence barely noticed. At 24, she was a waitress at the summit, dressed in a crisp white shirt, light blue waistcoat, and black pants, the standard uniform for the catering staff. Her blonde hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and she worked with practiced efficiency, pouring water, clearing plates, and dodging the elbows of distracted guests. Bella had come to Vienna from the Philippines as a teenager, taking low-paying jobs to support her family. Her days were long, filled with early shifts and late nights, but she carried a secret that no one in the room suspected. Since she was a child, Bella had been fascinated by languages. She taught herself using whatever she could find: old library books, free online courses, and grainy PDFs of academic papers. Most importantly, her late grandfather, a tribal leader from Papua New Guinea, had passed down oral traditions, including rare scripts used by his people. Bella had spent years transcribing his teachings, saving them on her laptop and studying them in the dim light of her tiny apartment after work. Her grandfather's lessons were vivid in her mind. He'd sit her on his lap as a child, pointing to symbols drawn in the dirt, explaining their meanings. "These aren't just lines," he'd say. "They're stories, Bella. Stories of our people, our spirits." By the time she was 14, she could read scripts that even scholars struggled with. Now, at 24, she spoke 15 languages fluently, including several rare Pacific dialects. She'd never had formal training, but she'd corresponded with experts under a pseudonym, sending insights through emails and online forums. No one at the summit knew the depth of her knowledge. Not her boss, not the guests, not even the colleagues who saw her every day. Thorne, meanwhile, was unraveling. His theories kept collapsing, and his frustration grew louder. He slammed his tablet onto the table, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. "This is impossible," he snapped, rubbing his temples. The crowd stayed silent, the air heavy with tension. Reporters stopped writing, and a few professors whispered to each other, their faces concerned. Thorne scanned the room, desperate for a way to shift the focus from his failure. His eyes landed on Bella, who was refilling a water pitcher near his table. A cruel smile spread across his face, and he saw an opportunity to regain control. "Hey, waitress," he called, his voice loud enough to turn every head in the room. Bella paused, her hands steady on the pitcher. "Want to take a shot at this?" Thorne continued, pointing to the screen. "Maybe your simple ideas can do what we doctors of language can't." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Though some guests looked uncomfortable, their smiles forced. Bella's cheeks flushed, but she didn't flinch. Her boss, a short man with a nervous frown, hurried over, his hands waving. "Bella, ignore him," he whispered urgently. "Keep working, don't make a scene." But Thorne wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his tone mocking. "Come on, don't hide. Translate this part, probably just some old recipe for tribal stew or a fairy tale about fish." The room grew tense, the laughter fading into awkward silence. A few guests shifted in their seats, embarrassed by Thorne's cruelty. One professor, a woman with silver hair, shook her head slightly, her lips pursed. Bella set the pitcher down, her movements slow and deliberate. The clink of glass on the table was the only sound in the room. She looked at Thorne, her brown eyes steady, unflinching. He crossed his arms, expecting her to shrink away, to mumble an apology and retreat. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and took a step toward the front of the hall. "May I see the screen, doctor?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. The crowd murmured, surprised. Thorne blinked, caught off guard, then let out a sharp laugh. "Be my guest," he said, stepping aside with a dramatic wave, as if inviting her to a stage she'd surely fail on. The reporters leaned forward, sensing something unexpected. Bella walked to the front, her cheap black shoes clicking on the polished wooden floor. Every eye followed her, some with curiosity, others with pity, and a few with amusement. She reached the screen and stood before the symbols, her gaze tracing their curves and angles. The room waited, braced for her to stumble, to prove Thorne's point. Thorne leaned against the head table, his smirk firmly in place, ready to pounce on her inevitable mistake. But Bella's face was calm, her expression focused, as if the symbols were speaking to her in a language only she could hear. She tilted her head slightly, her fingers twitching as if recalling something from memory. The crowd held its breath, the silence so thick it seemed to hum. She pointed to the first cluster of signs, her voice soft but steady. "This isn't about food, doctor," she said, glancing at Thorne. "The first symbol isn't mountain, like you thought. It's guardian spirit. The line says, where the guardian spirit talks to the waves, the hidden knowledge waits for the right person." A ripple of gasps spread through the hall. Thorne's smirk froze, then twisted into a forced laugh. "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice loud but less certain. "A lucky guess. What, did you pick that up from some online video?" He waved a hand, dismissing her, but the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. A professor near the front leaned forward, squinting at the screen. A reporter's pen hovered over her notebook, her eyes darting between Bella and the symbols. Bella didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the screen, her cheap black shoes scuffing the polished floor, and pointed to another symbol, a sharp, curved line like a breaking wave. "This one," she said, "means waves in the old dialect. It's not a map or a trade log. It's a ritual code used by tribal leaders to hide sacred knowledge." The room buzzed with whispers. Thorne's face tightened, his gray eyes narrowing. "You're making this up," he snapped, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his unease. Bella turned to him, her expression calm but unflinching. "I'm not," she said simply. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Let me show you." She connected her phone to the projector, and a series of images appeared beside the script, hand-drawn sketches of similar symbols, neatly labeled with translations, cross-referenced with other Pacific languages. A detailed word list followed, each entry paired with notes on pronunciation and cultural meaning. The crowd leaned in, scholars scribbling furiously, their earlier skepticism replaced by curiosity. "My grandfather was a tribal leader in Papua New Guinea," Bella said, her voice steady but tinged with pride. "He taught me these scripts before he passed away. I've studied them for 10 years, piecing together what he told me with what I could find online and in books." She tapped her phone, zooming in on a sketch that matched the screen symbols exactly. "This script isn't just writing. It's a code for rituals, passed down orally, with sound clues woven into the shapes. I worked it out during nights after my shifts." The room was silent now, every word sinking in. A woman in the back, a museum curator from London with a sharp bob and glasses, stood up. "Those notes," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "They match fragments we've had in our archives for decades." "Who are you?" Bella hesitated, her fingers tightening around her phone. She hadn't planned to reveal so much, but there was no turning back. "My name is Bella Santos," she said. "I've shared some of my work online under the name Linguara Pacifica." The name hung in the air, and a wave of recognition swept through the room. A young professor gasped, turning to his colleague. "Linguara Pacifica? She's the one who sent those papers to Cambridge." Another scholar, an older man with a gray beard, nodded vigorously. "I've read her posts on Pacific dialects. They're brilliant, better than most published work." Reporters began typing furiously, their cameras clicking as they captured Bella standing calmly by the screen. Thorne's face drained of color. He stepped forward, trying to regain control. "This is absurd," he said, his voice louder than necessary. "You expect us to believe a waitress solved what my team couldn't? Show me proof, real proof, not sketches on a phone." His words were sharp, but they lacked the confidence of before. Bella met his gaze, unflinching. She swiped to another image on her phone, a screenshot of an email exchange. "You might recognize this," she said, projecting it for all to see. The email was from Thorne's assistant to Linguara Pacifica, requesting help with Pacific scripts for his latest book. The reply, written by Bella under her pseudonym, offered detailed insights into the symbols. Thorne's response was curt, "Thanks, but I need real experts, not amateurs." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads at Thorne's dismissal. "You wrote me off," Bella said, her voice quiet but cutting. "You said my work wasn't good enough, but you used parts of it in your book anyway." I checked. The accusation landed like a stone. A woman in the audience, a linguist from the Smithsonian, stood up. "I've seen your book, Dr. Thorne," she said, her tone sharp. "Some of those translations looked familiar. Are you saying you didn't know they came from Linguara Pacifica?" Thorne opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands clenching at his sides. The room was no longer his. Scholars began whispering to each other, comparing Bella's notes to Thorne's published work. Reporters scribbled faster, sensing a scandal. Bella stepped back from the screen, her hands steady but her heart racing. She hadn't meant to upend the summit, but the truth was out. The curator from London approached her, holding out a business card. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes bright. "Your work could change how we understand Pacific languages." Other scholars crowded around, asking questions, praising her precision. Bella answered quietly, her voice never rising, but each word carried weight. She explained how her grandfather's oral teachings had guided her, how she'd spent years cross-referencing symbols with online archives, how she'd taught herself rare dialects while working double shifts to pay rent. Thorne stood frozen, his earlier arrogance replaced by a dawning realization. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely to Bella, and he was no longer the center of the room. A reporter approached him, her recorder held out. "Dr. Thorne, did you knowingly use Linguara Pacifica's work without credit?" He stammered, his face flushed, but no coherent answer came. The hall buzzed with energy, the air thick with astonishment and whispers of Bella's name. She stood by the screen, still in her waitress uniform, her blonde hair catching the light. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph, but of relief. The secrets she'd carried for years were no longer hidden. The crowd of scholars, reporters, and academic leaders leaned forward, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe. Bella's phone, still connected to the projector, displayed her meticulous notes, each sketch and translation a piece of her hidden life now laid bare. Dr. Elias Thorne stood off to the side, his face pale, his hands clenched as the room's attention belonged entirely to the young woman he'd mocked moments ago. The curator from London, her glasses glinting, stepped closer to Bella. "Your Linguara Pacifica," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and admiration. "Your online papers have been circulating in our circles for years. Why didn't you ever come forward?" Bella's eyes softened, and she glanced at the floor before answering. "I didn't think anyone would listen," she said quietly. "I was just a waitress, sending emails from my apartment after work. I used a pseudonym because I thought no one would take me seriously." The room fell silent, her words sinking in. A professor from Cambridge, his tie loosened, stood up. "Your work on Pacific dialects," he said, "it's been referenced at our university. We had no idea it came from you." He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "This woman has done what entire teams couldn't." Whispers turned to murmurs, then to a swell of voices. Reporters typed furiously, their cameras flashing as they captured Bella's calm figure against the glowing screen. A young linguist in the back called out, "Show us more." Bella hesitated, then swiped her phone, pulling up another set of notes, diagrams linking the Papua New Guinea script to ancient oral traditions. "These symbols," she said, pointing to a series of curved lines, "aren't just words. They're sounds, meant to be spoken during rituals. My grandfather taught me how to read them by listening to his stories. He was the last leader in his tribe to know the full code." The crowd leaned in, captivated, as she explained how she'd spent a decade piecing together the script, using her grandfather's teachings and cross-referencing them with rare texts she found online. Thorne's world was crumbling. He stepped forward, trying to reclaim the room. "This is all speculation," he said, his voice strained. "She's a hobbyist, not a scholar. My team has been working on this for months." But his words fell flat. The Smithsonian linguist, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, stood again. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her tone icy, "your recent book cites translations that match Linguara Pacifica's work almost verbatim. Care to explain?" The crowd turned to him, waiting. Thorne's mouth opened, then closed, his earlier confidence gone. A reporter thrust a recorder toward him. "Did you know Linguara Pacifica was Bella Santos when you rejected her help?" she asked. Thorne stammered, his face flushed. I didn't realize," he said weakly, but the room wasn't buying it. The truth unraveled quickly. Bella projected another email, this one from Thorne himself, sent months ago to Linguara Pacifica. "No need for young help," it read. "I want real experts." The crowd gasped, some shaking their heads. A professor muttered, "He dismissed her without even reading her work." Another email showed Bella's polite response, offering detailed translations that Thorne had ignored, yet parts of those translations had appeared in his latest book, uncredited. The accusations were undeniable. Reporters scribbled, their stories already taking shape. The famous linguist exposed, his reputation built on stolen ideas. Thorne's allies began to slip away. A colleague who'd sat at his table stood, gathering his coat, and walked out without a word. Others followed, their faces grim. The room's focus stayed on Bella, who remained calm, answering questions with a quiet precision that commanded respect. "How did you learn so much without formal training?" a journalist asked. Bella smiled faintly. "I worked nights, studied during breaks, used whatever I could find. Books, forums, old papers. My grandfather gave me the start, but I kept going because I loved it." Her words resonated, a story of grit and passion that the crowd couldn't ignore. The fallout was swift. By the next morning, social media buzzed with Bella's story. Posts on X called her the waitress who humbled a legend, with clips of her translations going viral. Reporters dug into Thorne's work, finding more uncredited similarities to Linguara Pacifica's papers. His publisher issued a statement, promising an investigation. Universities canceled his speaking engagements, and his department placed him on leave, citing ethical concerns. Thorne's name, once synonymous with brilliance, became a cautionary tale of arrogance and theft. Bella's life transformed overnight. The curator from London offered her a research position at the British Museum, and Cambridge sent an email the next day, offering a full scholarship to their linguistics program. She accepted, leaving her waitressing job behind. Within weeks, she was leading a global team to preserve the Papua New Guinea script, now recognized as a UNESCO cultural treasure. Her story spread beyond academia, inspiring people who'd been overlooked or underestimated. Online forums lit up with messages from young women, immigrants, and self-taught scholars, all seeing themselves in Bella's rise. Real talent shines, no matter where you start, one post read, shared thousands of times. Months later, the Global Linguistics Summit reconvened, this time renamed the Indigenous Languages Forum in honor of native scholars like Bella. She stood at the podium, no longer in a waitress uniform but in a simple blazer, her blonde hair loose. The hall was packed, every seat filled with people eager to hear her speak. She shared her grandfather's stories, weaving them with her research, her voice steady and warm. "This script," she said, pointing to the same symbols that had stumped Thorne, "is a bridge to my people's past. It's not just mine to share, it belongs to everyone who listens." The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, others wiping tears. Far from the spotlight, Thorne watched the live stream from his small apartment, his career in ruins. He'd lost his teaching post, his book deals, his invitations to speak. The screen glowed with Bella's face, her words a reminder of the lesson he'd learned too late. Humility is the hardest skill, and true brilliance doesn't need a stage to shine. Bella's rise wasn't just her victory, it was a beacon for anyone who'd been dismissed, a proof that hidden talent could break through even the deepest injustice. As she finished her talk, the crowd rose to their feet, and Bella stood tall, her grandfather's spirit in every word she spoke. That was today's story. If it moved you, hit that like button, share it with a friend who appreciates a powerful twist, and subscribe for more cinematic tales that linger long after the screen fades. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from.